Hello, everybody, and a warm welcome to the 42 Rugby Weekly on United Rugby Championship Eve. That's not one of Rock Nation or Michael Yormack's clever new marketing ploys, I should stress. It's just that I'm personally rather excited that we're only a day away from a new season for the provinces. It doesn't be long creeping up on you, does it? Joining us to look ahead to the new men's season and to preview the Ireland women's team's pivotal World Cup qualifier with Scotland following their hard-earned victory over Italy are Bernard Jackman. How are you, Birch?
Yeah, excellent, thank you.
And half man, half machine, Murray Kinsella. I say that because I was on a late shift last night and I was just crossing the T's and dotting the I's after a busy night of soccer when I spy in the corner of my eye some big news dropping from international rugby players and World Rugby, who sent around a press release to announce the launch of new guidelines for contact training based on best practice, they say, and after feedback from almost 600 professional players. And this is a big story, I'm thinking to myself, and I could save the first person in the morning a job if I, box it off myself. But it's 12:15. I have to be up at about 7:30. We're recording the pod at 10, so I'm just going to leave it. I'm just going to leave it to the desk in the morning, I'm thinking. And then out of nowhere, a dark night, a silent guardian appears in the CMS in the back end of the site, and it turns out Murray Kinsella already has the piece boxed off himself in the wee hours of the morning. So that's probably a good place to start, Murray. It is big news, and if people haven't had a chance to check their phones, check the 42 or whatever over the last few hours, could you talk us through the gist of it?
Yeah, well, the only reason I did that last night is because I forgot to do it during the day. It was one of my to-do lists that I missed, and I generally missed quite a few of them. But basically, World Rugby have published, along with international rugby players, a new set of guidelines around contact during training weeks. Their recommendation, as it is at the moment, these aren't actually in law or enforced yet. They may become that, is 15 minutes of full contact training per week. You've got 30 minutes of live set-piece training per week and 40 minutes of controlled contact, i.e. with kind of shields and pads and less intensity per week. These are guidelines based on feedback from players. The average, I think, around full contact based on the feedback had been 21 minutes, but probably overall there was a bigger contact load on average across the board. So yeah, this is part of World Rugby's I suppose their response to that shocking news we had in 2020 about players, former professional players with early onset dementia and CTE. And obviously they've been scrambling now to show a real strong hand in player welfare and I suppose protect themselves in that regard, as well as obviously having concern for players. Like, player welfare is a big part of what they're there to do, World Rugby. So this is another step along the way. Joe Schmidt, obviously still in his World Rugby role, is leaving at the end of the year, but he was part of this. Pointed out that, listen, there's probably less full contact training than people would imagine anyway, and Birch can probably give us a bit of insight in that regard. You've seen Dave Rennie kind of querying the recommendations already just overnight. So it is going to be maybe a little bit restrictive if it becomes an actual limit that's imposed on teams rather than recommended. But it's another progressive move in my eyes, really, because the sport, it's not as safe as it could be, or hasn't been as safe as it could be. And this is a step towards it hopefully being that.
Yeah, Bert, you are well placed, obviously, to discuss it. I do remember a conversation with you in the past where you pointed out that the contact training done during the week would actually be a lot less than most people would imagine anyway. And as Murray is saying there's probably a kind of a 6-minute discrepancy on average between what the guidelines would suggest is the best practice and what's being done across the board. You're also in a WhatsApp group, naturally, with loads of coaches from around the world. So I'm wondering, is there a reaction from them? What are your thoughts on it overall?
There's no reaction whatsoever, because it actually is in line with what best practices become, to be honest. Every single year, I'd say, since rugby went pro, there's been better measurement of load. And obviously load can be contact load or high-speed meters or, jumping in lineouts or whatever, gym load. So they are on top of this, and sports science is developing, has been developing all the time, and everybody's getting a clear idea of what's the optimum level in terms of, what do you need to be more robust and to prevent injury. And that's the big fallacy as well. I mean, if you do no contact, you're a bigger risk in a game on a Saturday, because obviously it's a shock to the body. So there's that Goldilocks, that precise bit that obviously coaches are trying to get, and it's really important that it's consistent and it's not driven by a win or a loss or a poor performance or a good performance. That you just get consistency in your weekly training, and players know what to expect. Players' bodies adapt to that, and we can make them better equipped to be safe on a match day, but also also not risk injury during the week at training. So for me, I think there's been absolutely none. And I know I looked at some of the comments on Twitter and things. I think people were shocked, but this is the way the modern game is. I mean, they spend lots of time training and walkthroughs and different elements of training, but they don't actually do much contact anymore.
If it was to become gospel, Bert, where it had to be followed to the letter of the law, how do you think that would be supervised in practical terms? Do you think it'd have to be done independently? Because that would seem to require a lot more sort of extra roles, if you like, kind of supervisory roles, or could it be done internally on a sort of an honours system or an honours basis?
Yeah, I think it'll be done on a internal basis, purely on trust. And I think the players, the leadership group in each professional team will be aware of it, and they'll give feedback to the coaches. And look, I think the players will understand that 1 week there might be a couple of minutes extra, and they'll communicate that, and over time it'll become more consistent. And I've seen this in practice. I mean, in France, there's very strict rules around time off over Christmas, etc. And I remember we were in a tricky spot in Grenoble, and I can't remember the exact number of days we had to give the players off consecutively, but just say it was around 5 maybe. And the way the schedule fell and the calendar fell, effectively we were going to go from, say, round 12 to round 13 with only half a training day, and we had a must-win home game on, say, Stephen's Day. And I mean, we suggested that we do a day in those 5, and we give them 2 days off after it. And players unilaterally agreed to it, except someone rang Proval, which is the players' union, and they were down. It's like a ton of bricks. And I mean, to actually get caught breaking that, it's one thing to get caught talking about it, but to get caught breaking it in France is ridiculously well marshaled, and obviously the fines and the punishments are very strong, even potentially match points. So we didn't train, we won the match, but as a coach, you're kind of just closing your eyes and hoping that you get the prep done. But look at Proval are good in terms of protecting players in France, and that's what World Rugby are trying to do now. So it's just a case of trying to adapt, I suppose, and be able to manage those times when you feel that maybe the team need a little bit of extra contact, but obviously still staying within the regulations, and making sure your pre-season plan, your season plan is very, very detailed and able to make sure you're ready to play.
Murray, big win for the Ireland women's team over the weekend, and I suppose we were looking for a performance, as were everybody invested in this team on a kind of an emotional level, or anyone involved in that setup. And for the most part, they got it. They got the job done anyway, most importantly, and they're kind of back on the horse, so to speak, still in it.
Absolutely, and it was a much improved performance, particularly the defensive side of things was really, really strong. From early on, Ciara Griffin probably leading line speed there, and a couple of early big shots. You had Catherine Dane with a nice interception earlier on, just to show that line speed was there, and they forced errors from Italy's attack. They're very ambitious, aren't they, Italy? They'll play from anywhere, but Irish pressure really forced them into a number of errors. The kind of key moments were that grandstand before halftime, or leading up to halftime in the Irish 22. Ciara Griffin made a brilliant tackle there. They forced them into touch, and finally Stacey Flood kind of broke out, and that was as much the winning of the game as some of the attacking stuff. Even in the second half, you had Eve Higgins in the centre making a couple of turnovers, and some big maul defence laid on in the game. On top of that, you had 2 excellent tries. Really pleasing for the pack to get that maul score, or they were stopped just short with a big maul, and Stacey Flood and Parsons did really well to finish off back in the short side. And then Amy Lee Murphy-Crowe's try was a real thriller, wasn't it? Bevan Parsons beating 7 defenders on a kick return from a missed touch. Just a thrilling run up the left to show her ability with ball in hand. She's such an exciting player. And then slick handling from Flood and Higgins and Considine just to shift the ball wide right to Murphy Crowe for a finish. There are definitely still issues there. The line out had some big key losses again. It's not looking like a confident part of their game at all. And then in the 22, which you mentioned last week, again, they were wasteful. There were 2 misses in the first half, and I think there were 7 in the second half where they got in the 22 and didn't get a score out of it. So they're getting into these brilliant positions on the pitch. It could have been a more comfortable victory in the end, but just the boost of it, just getting through those tricky moments after Italy scored, when Considine was in the sin bin, and managing that mentally when we had those maybe concerns after a setback in the first game was really positive, and sets them up nicely now for the Scotland game. They'll have a bit more belief, and it's absolutely there for them. It's really well poised with all the teams on 5 points coming into the final round, but Ireland are in a pretty decent position now.
Bert, you're the man to ask about the line-out, naturally, and Killian, who's one of the 42 members at the 42.ie, he's in the WhatsApp group there with everybody. He was saying it'd be great to get your perspective on what's going wrong with Ireland's line-out and how is it fixed, do you reckon?
Yeah, look, I think it's poor in all areas, really. So it's poor in terms of the movement across the ground, the speed across the ground to find space. It's poor in terms of I suppose the decoys, the dummies to try and get the opposition, to beat the opposition on the ground, and then obviously the hooker's got a much better margin for her. Some of the throwing hasn't been great, and I think I saw a clip actually. They put up an Instagram of training, and I saw some line out lifting technique, and it's probably because of the camera angle you get a really close look at it, and I mean it's just not best practice. There's another foot. There's no stability. So I think there's a huge amount of technical work that needs to be done in the building blocks of the line out, and then obviously it's just not quite there, I'd say, across nearly all aspects of it, and hence we're seeing a line out that is playing without confidence, a line out that's playing without ball security. That's given the opposition belief that they can kick it out and get after that line out, and they're contesting in the air, so that pressure magnifies. So look, it's not going to get massively fixed in the next couple of days, particularly when it's those building blocks that need to be done in their clubs, and that was the worrying thing for me with the camera angles I've got from the games. Sometimes it's hard to see that side on. It's very hard to see the side on view, and in fairness, I'm talking about one example that I saw, but in that example, it would, I suppose, justify my initial impression was that just everything is not right in terms of those building blocks, and it's not just a hooker or throwing issue. So, it's an area of concern. Scotland's defensive line hasn't been brilliant. Can they get a couple of movements in this week that gets that hooker a little bit of space and they have a little bit more comfort and then build a little bit of confidence? But yeah, I think it's an overall skills and technique issue that just needs to be drilled a little bit harder. It's nothing they can't do, but maybe there's been a different priority. Maybe they've been working on different parts of the game, but certainly it has been a bit of an Achilles heel in this competition.
It's a testament to the other areas of their game, Murray, in a way, isn't it? How often have we had conversations where we've seen a line-out dissolve, crumble, and the fact of the matter is that in most situations, if you're playing against a team who are on a similar enough level to yourself, if you can't win your own ball, you can't win the game. And yet Ireland did that anyway. So on the one hand, it is a massive concern because as you make the step up to face even better opposition again, it will cripple you ultimately. But I hate the term green shoots, but there is actual signs of a coherent and decent team there when you're winning a game, in the end winning well, without a functioning line-out whatsoever.
Yeah, but that makes it equally frustrating, I think, even if you think about that score in the first game against Italy where they nailed their line-out drill for Parsons' brilliant try down the left-hand side, 2 phases of really well-executed attack, and they score in the left-hand corner. That's what can happen as a result. When you nail that line-out, you can get your 15-metre maul surging towards the try line and give your backs a nice little finish in the short side. They're the possibilities, and I think that's what Ireland, and in fairness to them, speaking to the players this week, Eve Higgins mentioned it. They're obviously happy to have beaten Italy, but there's loads of wrongs that they still feel they need to right. There's loads of opportunity that they're missing, And we're only seeing a little glimmer of the potential because the lineout is such a core part of the game. That's where the predominant number of tries stem from. You know, it's the key platform. It's an area you work hugely off in terms of your attack and setting up different ideas and different tactics for each game. So if they can nail that a little bit more accurately, I think we'll see a lot more of the potential in this Irish team, because as Amy Lee Murphy-Crowe's try shows, that backline is really, really dangerous. We mentioned Parsons and Murphy-Crowe a few times, but get the ball in their hands, they will always beat defenders. Higgins growing into that jersey, Flood always with those creative touches. So if they can get that line out functioning, even the 5 metre chances they missed against Italy as well, where your maul can do damage, they're massive parts of the game. So you're bang on. Yeah, it's creditable to still do the job and base it on your defence and a couple of excellent scores, but it can be even better with a functioning line out.
It certainly could. I guess some of the exposure of the team, for want of a better term, could be better as well, at least according to Killian here, who had a second half to his question. He says it's a much broader question, and it is, how do we entice more supporters to engage with the women's games? Even in this group, and he's alluding there to the 42 members WhatsApp group, a brave man, I should say. It's a group of Irish rugby supporters, and there was tenfold the chat about Australia versus South Africa on Saturday than there was about Ireland versus Italy on Sunday. If a group that's dedicated to rugby on this island doesn't engage conversation, something is going wrong. And the first thing I'd say there is I wouldn't necessarily judge an Irish rugby WhatsApp group for speaking less about a women's game than about, say, a South Africa versus Australia game, because this has been the way of the world for long enough. I mean, this is actually part of the conversation. That would be the natural course of things, and that's what you're trying to change ultimately, and what Killian seems to want to change as well. We did touch upon some of it last week, Murray, but if I could bring you back in there, like, what did you make of, say, I don't know, is hype the right word? But I guess the attention that game got versus, say, some games in the past. Are things moving in the right direction? How do we actually accelerate that process of getting people more invested in this women's team?
Yeah, well, the disappointing thing is that most people who engage with the kind of furore around the Donnybrook fiasco probably didn't even bother watching the women's rugby match. They're happy to kind of give out about what's going on there, and they don't have any actual interest in the game. So that for me is always a frustration. However, like how do you draw people to any sporting endeavour? Like, it's success, isn't it? I think of examples like Irish rowing, and maybe I was just completely ignorant before and it was always that strong, but I certainly engaged with it more when there was gold medals and silver medals being won. I think of the Irish women's hockey team when they had a run of success. I now count myself as an expert in Irish hockey as well. Like, it engages, it gathers people. The quality has to be good enough, and if I'm being honest, the quality of the last 2 Ireland matches hasn't been very high. Like, the error count has been massive as well, and that probably turns people away when they get an opportunity to watch it. So I think it's what you do on the pitch. Good quality performances and success really gathers people around it. We know that there's always a bandwagon when things get going, and a lot of that bandwagon ends up staying when it comes to sport as well. So yeah, like, people talk a lot about women's sport and what should be happening and shouldn't be happening off and on the pitch, then probably don't engage with it, but you've got to do your part on there to draw them in.
There is a role off the pitch as well for the likes of ourselves, Bernard, and for sponsors. Say you look at Lidl have done a massive job with women's Gaelic football, to the extent now that it's attended, All Ireland finals are attended by probably 55 or so thousand people on a good year, non-pandemic year. And I think Katie Taylor's professional boxing career is a great example. Now, people at home in Ireland might say, well, I haven't watched much of Taylor's professional career at all. I actually heard more about her when she was an amateur. But the thing is, she's actually massive within boxing now. And if you could make a women's rugby team massive within rugby and actually see that team appeal to the more casual rugby fan, then things are moving in the right direction. And the way Taylor's career has been promoted, if you go back to when she actually turned professional in 2016, she, Brian Peters and Eddie Hearn had no idea how it was going to go. It might have only lasted 4 or 5 fights. Now she's one of the highest earning female athletes on the planet, maybe the highest earning outside of tennis. If you look at that Forbes list every year, which she isn't on, but just with an understanding what she's making. And in terms of the legitimacy and the reverence with which she's held by boxing fans around the world now, she kind of broke the mold for a sport. And the way I think that happened is because, as Murray was saying, on the pitch or in the ring, in her situation, she was legitimately good. But equally, people actually shouting about her from the rooftops. There's an element of having to force it down people's throats until it sticks as well. And I don't know, can we be doing more in that regard then? Not just the three of us, but maybe the sport in general.
Yeah, I think the two examples you gave. So like Katie was an Olympic gold medalist. So I think that reinforces Murray's point about the actual quality of the performances and the product. And then the other one, the women's GA. Let's be honest, it's been promoted and driven for a lot longer. It's ingrained in most towns and villages and counties throughout the country. So it's believable, or sorry, it's understandable why they can have 50,000 people. And I wouldn't put that all down to the sponsorship campaign, but I think in tandem, when you get a very strong domestic game, when you get the product right, you get the right sponsorship and activation, then you have a chance, right? So at the moment, we don't have a vibrant domestic game. We missed out on a World Cup, a home World Cup, where we didn't capitalize on that and I suppose win the hearts and minds of the public. That's my honest opinion on it. I know, Derek, if you don't agree with that, but I don't feel that we benefited or took advantage of having a home World Cup, and we're still kind of just trotting along. And obviously, the performances aren't where we need to be. So I think it'd be very hard for a sponsor. I think the media outlets, commenting are reporting on it. The game is now live on Saturday on RT, which is not just on the player; it's live on terrestrial TV. That's a huge opportunity, and like slowly we'll build it. But as I said, I think it's across those three platforms: media, there's four actually: media, sponsorship, domestic, and that'll actually lead to then the performances by having more playing numbers, by having better coaching, etc., etc. So. Yeah, unfortunately it's not an easy fix. I don't see us being able to compete with France and England in February, unfortunately, because we're behind in terms of where we need to be. But if you don't start now, in 4 years' time, we'll be no closer, we'll be further away.
100%. Well, speaking of starts and speaking of terrestrial television, the United Rugby Championship, its inaugural season is about to begin. We're about, 36 hours away? Less. I'm terrible at maths. We're recording at about 10 a.m. on Thursday. It all kicks off on Friday evening. Murray, I just want to ask you, are you as excited about this as I am, and as excited as, say, most of the rugby fans that I've come into contact with over the last week? Because there are still some, particularly in Wales, that I've been speaking with, even a couple of Welsh journalists with whom I'd be friendly, who just aren't sold on this. So whereabouts are you on the sort of Bernard Jackman hype scale from 1 to 10?
Yeah, I'm definitely a good 8 here. I get excited pretty easily, to be fair, around rugby, but I do think there's a freshness, there's a new tone to it, there's a new optimism, there's a new excitement and curiosity around the four new teams, obviously, and even all the branding and the URC TV. It just feels bigger and better, and it feels more comprehensive. It feels more like a really genuine league. Again, the key to it will be what happens on the pitch. Let's really hope that at least one or two of the South African teams is really strong, competitive this first weekend to keep that bit of intrigue going, and let's see the Bulls put it up to Leinster, or the Sharks give Munster a good fright at some stage in the game as well. That's the key to it. But I'm definitely enthusiastic about it, and you're so right. Like, I've found people more engaged than ever with the start of what was a Pro 12 or Pro 14 season. You used to kind of sleepwalk into the start of this, and it'd be several weeks before people are really engaged with it. But I've found that everyone's more excited, everyone's more interested in what's happening, and that's a really positive thing. I think the provinces will feed off that, plus the fact that you've got the fans back, which is just everything in this sport. Like the last year or longer was just, it's just hard to describe how kind of soulless it was in the stadiums, and that's not being ungrateful for being there, but it makes such a massive difference. And even if it's 75% or whatever it is at the moment, it's going to be absolutely huge.
It is. Birch, your thoughts ahead of kickoff tomorrow?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm over in Cardiff to watch Connacht Cardiff, and I'm excited to see how Connacht fare. And yeah, obviously then the weekend, Munster Sharks, Leinster Bulls, and Ulster Glasgow. The big thing for me is the South Africans. They need to make an impact. If they become competitive, if we have at least 2 of those 4, being able to win away from home, being able to gather points consistently, and putting the squeeze on, the Irish provinces, the Welsh and the Scots to get their act together. I think that's been the big issue, is that over the last 3 or 4 years, it's kind of been the natural pecking order nearly all the time, bar obviously, when Connacht won and Scarlets had that, both Connacht and Scarlets had that kind of superb seasons when they lifted the trophy. But in terms of league positions, you could nearly get a good gauge on it round 1 where it's going to end up at the end, and that's not good for any competition. Obviously, there's no relegation, so everything is focused on performance, winning trophies, playoffs, qualification for Europe. So it's a more positive mindset for coaches and players to have, which should lead to more expansive, more open rugby, risk-free rugby. And the South Africans, in fairness, they are trying to evolve. I mean, the Sharks are trying to evolve their attack. The Bulls played some phenomenal rugby in that Currie Cup final to beat the Sharks 44-10, even though they are very much, a Jake White, a team with Jake White's identity, which is set piece, defence, kicking game. But yeah, there's definitely individuals. I think it's unfortunate they're coming here without their box. When you look at the player drain to Europe, to Japan, and the makeup of the Springboks and how reliant they are on those players who've left the shores. Beneath that, there is I suppose a bit of there's a talent drain, obviously, and the box players can help bring all that glue together. Some really good young talent, but I just think it'd be great if I think it nearly would have been better if we had have gone there early doors, as in the Northern Hemisphere teams, and dealt with altitude, dealt with the travel, rather than the other way around, where, let's be honest, it looks like the Bulls and Sharks are running into, well, they're running into the 2 best funded teams in the competition anyway. So that could maybe be a big ask for them. But look, let's hope they surprise us and they really put big performances out together and get round 1 off to a flyer.
When you say it might have been better for us to go to them first, is that from the point of view of the provinces and that you get the trip out of the way, you get the altitude out of the way early doors, or from the point of view of the credibility of, say, the competition? Because, say, as a spectacle this weekend, it could transpire that the 2 visiting South African teams that we expect to be good, in the Sharks and the Bulls, get a bit of a thumping in the circumstances, and maybe that sets things off on the wrong foot.
Yeah, to be honest, my motivation for saying that was for the competition to get credibility and to have really competitive games round 1. I see your point. If I was a Leinster Munster fan or Ulster Connacht, and I thought I could go there and win an away game early doors, which might be more difficult in 2 months' time. Yeah, there's definitely that side of it. But look at, I'm jumping to conclusions here that they're not going to be competitive, and I'm not. I hope they're not. I hope they are going to be competitive. And also, let's be honest, Leinster Munster shouldn't be fully wound up round 1 either. So often the first round can be a little bit error strewn, and look at these teams are decent. They've got good players. It's just whether they're able to adapt to Northern Hemisphere refereeing, whether they're able to adapt to the different style of play quite quickly. So yeah, it's like we're talking, and the bookies expect the Sharks and the Bulls to suffer heavy defeats. But I'm going there and hope that they're really competitive without winning, but being competitive.
We could all absolutely have egg on our faces come Monday for sure. Murray, we're going to go through this on a province by province basis. Look ahead for each of the 4 of them. And we've got a load of listeners' questions to get through. I wanted to start with Ulster because we focused on the Ireland women's team last week and we didn't get a chance to discuss Dwayne Vermeulen's arrival. I think it actually happened possibly as we were recording or just afterwards anyway. So a week on, it really adds, I think, a huge impetus to Ulster's season. I think a couple of weeks ago, Jordy Murphy was speaking with Adam McKendry in a piece we had on site, and he was asked what constitutes a successful season for Ulster this season, and he said a trophy. And I think he said along the lines of, I actually don't care what it looks like, this squad needs a trophy. Now, I don't know if he meant he doesn't care what the trophy looks like specifically, as in it could be a Pro 14 or a European trophy, or he didn't care what it looked like, him saying that. Either way, though, with the arrival of Vermeulen, they're probably a step closer to actually making or bridging that gap. So the impact of Vermeulen and I guess Ulster's chances this season from yourself.
It's a massive boost, even just psychologically for the whole province. You saw the delight of Ulster fans who maybe had resigned themselves to this not happening. Obviously, the Nakarawa deal fell through, and Ulster had said they were going to look for an 8. It's a late stage to get it across the line, but what a name to announce. Like, our most recent evidence of Vermeulen really is a couple of years ago at this stage, and he is 35. So there's that slight nag and concern about what he's put his body through at this stage of his career. But say in the 2019 World Cup run, he was phenomenal, really impactful, really important as the defensive leader of the Springboks, really calming and composed. And that's another part of it that he brings. He brings a winner's mentality, someone who's used to getting across the line, and will infuse other players with that bit of belief as well. It's a massive boost in that sense. I do have those nagging concerns around an older player who's been through injuries. I always do. But he's not due to arrive till November as well, which is a bit of a delay, and you would hope that he just gets through and gets back up to full speed. We saw him make his return for the Boks after missing the Lions series, and he was understandably a bit rusty, but you saw those glimpses of his ability to provide kind of dominant moments in games as well. So Ulster will be hoping that he gets right up to speed before the start of the Champions Cup, and it is a bit of a missing piece of the jigsaw. They have got Nick Timoney there, who's been brilliant since Marcel Coetzee left. He's really come into his own and will do an outstanding job before Vermeulen arrives, and no doubt fight hard for his spot. But you've signed a world-class player, a massive household name, and as much as anything, it just excites Ulster fans and gives them a bit of belief before the start of the season.
Birch, I'm getting eerie flashbacks to our chat when Nakarawa was announced as Ulster's marquee signing not long ago, and I'm wondering, do you share Murray's concerns about Vermeulen due to his age and injury profile in recent years?
No, I think he's going to be a great signing for them, and part of that is his intelligence off the field. So I'm lucky a friend of mine has coached him in Kubota Spears, Franz Lüdecke, and apparently, like, he was like an extra coach, and sometimes that's a bad thing, because you don't want your best player spending half the time in the coach's room, not really concentrating on playing. But apparently he was brilliant. He was able to identify the things that have worked well for him in his previous clubs or with South Africa. But also was, I suppose, able to understand the limitations of his teammates, and what would work and what only worked because the Boks had, X, Y, and Z. So, and also he was very good at analysing opposition mid-game, whereas Franz would send a message on with a water boy to a huddle, and Dwayne was already telling him the same thing. And he's kind of a bit like Bakkies Botha when he went to Toulon, where you were like, oh, are Toulon going to get out of him? I think someone like Dwayne Vermeulen, they're never there to pick up a pension or a paycheck. I think once the game is on, I mean, they're just so naturally competitive. They can't hold themselves back. And that was probably a little bit my concern with Nakawara. Did he really still have the hunger and desire to go deep? And I think Dwayne has it. He's produced everywhere. So, look, it's not ideal to be signing a guy with his age profile, but let's be honest, if you look at the Pro 14 signings across the board, no one brought in anybody of his quality, 25, 26. So that's just where we're at. The best players at the moment are going to... Dwayne is one of the best players, but the players with the perfect profile, i.e., age, injury profile, etc., world stars, are going to Japan or France, and in the odd case, the Premiership. So I think he's a big boost, and he won't be as explosive a ball carrier as Marcel. He's a good ball carrier. He's very physical. He's very good in the backfield off box kicks, which is part of the game here. But I think his edge, his hardness, his credibility as a World Cup winner. It was effectively co-captain for me in the World Cup win. And I just think it's a great bit of business for Ulster and exactly what they need.
Just in this kind of area as well, it's absolutely brilliant to sign world-class top names and excite the fans that way. But there's also an onus increasingly on Ulster each year to produce more of their own homegrown forwards of a top-class calibre. Like Ian Henderson is probably the only one in recent times who's got right to that high level with Ireland and been a starter and pushed onto a Lions tour. You'd hope someone like David McCann might be in that bracket to push through, because they really need a a batch of forwards there driving things on. I suppose that is one of the question marks this season. There's an undoubted talent out the backline. Like, you could list two really classy, exciting backlines there, but it's the consistency of application up front, being able to get on top of opposition and grind them a little bit more in that area. That's really key. Vermeulen will absolutely help with that come November and onwards, but it's more than about just one player, and they need to keep working hard in that pipeline to get a couple more of their own homegrown guys through.
That, I'd say, partially answers Owen O'Sullivan's question here, Bernard, which is, where do Ulster need to make up the ground against Leinster? Their depth is looking good and they have game winners across the pitch now. So in which specific areas do they need to improve?
Yeah, I thought I did something with Jordy Murphy for the launch, and he said that they identified fitness as a big issue, that when they look back at those big games that they lost, there was periods, not long, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, where they just knocked off, whether that was physical fatigue or mental fatigue, and the likes of Leinster capitalising. And that's the big thing about Leinster that people don't maybe understand, is that they're quite robotic in terms of the level of intensity they're able to play from 0 to 80 minutes, and they make mistakes, etc., but they don't really double down on those mistakes, and some of that is down to their conditioning levels, and Jordy, it was interesting that Jordy identified that. Dan does want to play a high tempo game, and I think that's the key for Ulster. They don't have that dominant front five as of yet, so they have to box clever. But yeah, I just think they're not far away. Like, they have been, for me, probably closer to Leinster than Munster in the Pro 14. And they just, when it comes to the crunch against Leinster in particular, they've had those little moments of indecision, of inaccuracies, which they put down to fitness. And I'm sure it's not just fitness, but it was interesting that that's the area that they've really focused on this preseason. That's
fascinating, because I was going to add that, like, they've had, and I've mentioned before in the pod around Ulster, they've had this habit in the bigger games of making back-to-back or even back-to-back-to-back errors, whereas someone like Leinster are really good at potentially making an error and then immediately resetting and winning the next moment, for using a cliche. And I know it's an awful one, but they're really good at that. They just erase the memory of that error and they get on. Whereas Ulster, you've seen maybe a bad box kick followed by a maul penalty concession, and then suddenly the opposition are in their 22 and someone misses a tackle and it's a score, and then the game is completely swung. Like, it can be literally 90-second passage and it costs the game. So that's really interesting insight. Maybe it's a fitness, a little bit of a mental element as well. But I agree with Birch. Like, there's so much to be excited about in that squad. There's so much game-breaking talent, as the question put it. Like Robert Balakoon, we saw his debut try for Ireland, the damage he can do. Hopefully Will Addison, I know he's got an injury this week, but hopefully he can get a run now in the back line, where I could go through so many other names, but there's just loads of ability there.
Birch, when you say that you feel Ulster have been closer to Leinster than Munster in the Pro 14, are we talking like literally on the scoreboard in recent seasons, or just in terms of sort of competitiveness and quality even?
Just being consistently up there, and I'd say consistency. I don't, quality-wise, look, I wouldn't, it'd be a big ask to choose one or the other. I think they're quite evenly matched. Their best 15, particularly now, because I think that young batch of Ulster backs, I think, are ready to come of age. I think that's the difference this year. I mean, we saw playing for Ireland, over the summer series. I know there's a lot of focus on the Lions, but when you look back at those games, the Ulster contingent really did well, and I think they're going to go back. And I think Dan has had to suffer to a certain extent in terms of getting those guys to 10, 15 pro games, and you have to be tolerant of those errors. You have to let them develop, and I think that they have developed now, and now they've gone from being Ulster Pro 14 regulars to Ulster Champions Cup regulars to Ireland internationals. And I'm not saying that they're all going to start for Ireland in a first choice 15, but they're very, very close now. So I think that Ulster have developed better squad depth through their own development system, and it was a great crop of young players. So it's very difficult to develop players who don't have that natural athleticism or game sense. I do agree with Murray that the front five, they need to get a couple more of those. But I think in a front five, they're not a million miles off it, and you can drill a front five. You can you can get them to be better in terms of their collective work, better technically, and as long as you have the power element, and I think with Hendo, with Vermeulen, with Chimney, with Jordy Murphy, etc., they have enough of that. They have enough bang in collisions to be able to go toe to toe with the heavyweights. I don't think they're a million miles away, and I would say they've done a better job developing those youngsters than Munster have. I know we've spoken that before, but they've managed to get reasonable results and also still give game time. Whereas Munster have obviously got reasonable results, but I think they've held back they've been too conservative with some of those youngsters that we've spoken about before, and we know are in their development system now.
Would you go along with that, Murray?
Yeah, I do think they're in good shape, moving in the right direction. They've got more than enough quality to have a home quarterfinal, let's say, in the URC. I think they're playing Clermont and Northampton in the Champions Cup. That's manageable. That they should be beating those teams and advancing through there. So, yeah, there's plenty to be excited about and positive about. Everyone obviously can't win trophies every single season, but they will be in the mix, absolutely. They were a little bit unfortunate with the format of how we ended up with the Pro 14 last season and not being able to go on in a challenge in a playoff setting. So they'll be excited to get back to that level, and I think they're moving in the right direction.
Let's chat about Leinster, the champions, and the team that the other three will need to probably knock off if they are going to break their own trophy ducks this season. We've loads of questions from listeners in here, and they're all incredibly specific. So just to speak about them in broader terms to begin with, sticking with yourself, Murray, we're kind of speaking about the URC here, and we know that in reality, if Leinster are at their best within the context of that competition, they should probably win it again, even with the South African teams. We'll see how that plays out, obviously. But I guess in Leinster, the broader context in terms of their own aspirations is to compete again in Europe and really properly compete. And it's been a while now. And every year there's been sort of reasons for it, like an underperformance in a big game as they see it. And yet there was probably actually a discrepancy or a disparity in overall quality, not a massive one, but between them and La Rochelle on the day in Europe last season. So where are the areas in which Leinster need to improve in order to take that next step in their own journey, this Leinster team?
I think they've probably spoken a bit about that tight five dominance as well, and nailing that in the biggest games against La Rochelle and Saracens, not having a set piece disaster as they did in that quarterfinal. It seems like ages ago against Sarries in the Champions Cup, and then La Rochelle, when they felt that guys like Skelton just were the dominant figures in that knockout clash again. Like not much is going to change in Leinster. The key to all this is consistency. The best teams, the best organisations, they do the same things and the simple things really, really well over the course of a number of years. And even the squad doesn't have a huge number of changes. Scott Fardy is retired, but there's always another layer of players coming up through that. And that's probably the step now is guys like Ryan Baird, Dan Sheehan, those kind of guys becoming more prominent in match day 23s and even starting teams in the bigger clashes and not just in the URC. So it's, I suppose, getting that continuous progression of your squad as well as tactically as well. Stuart Lancaster is a very clever guy, and Leo Cullen is probably underrated in that regard as well. They're intelligent at making the game work for them. They've got new challenges now. Their pick and jam game in the opposition 22 with the new laws around the goal line dropout and being held up, there's going to have to be tweaks there. The 50-22, you've no doubt that they'll have clever tactics and understanding of that to absolutely exploit that for all it's worth. So yeah, it may not be a complete departure from what they've been doing, but it's about getting incrementally better in all the areas that they're already excellent in.
There's a question here, I guess, about the next generation or one of a lost generation now, Bernard, from Jonathan Fitzpatrick. He was wondering, do you have any background on Lucas Bertie Newman's move to Bristol? Has he has to be a bit of a loss for the Leinster Academy and the Irish setup, says Jonathan, especially after Karl Martin took a move to Montpellier next year too.
Yeah.
Last year, sorry.
I'm unfortunately I'm involved in this.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. So I coached him in school. With Johnny Murphy. In my opinion, he left school in May as a 17-year-old, so he could have done another year. He was eligible next year for the Leinster schools again. But because of family circumstances. He finished at the same time as his older brother. He's a kid from Chile. He came to Newbridge as a 14-year-old and played on the Junior Cup team. Basically, got Newbridge to a Junior Cup final on his own, a one-man show. And I would say he's the most talented. He's the most talented school kid I've seen in the last 20 years. Okay, so I'm really disappointed that there wasn't a place for him in the Leinster system. But the problem is, and this is the challenge now for Leinster. So Leinster have created a model which works incredibly well for Leinster, and particularly the demographic of players that they tend to get 90% of their talent pool from. In that they don't make a decision on an academy spot until usually, unless you're really, really exceptional, and they're trying to make those exceptional cases less and less. So they put you into a sub academy when you leave school, and the theory is you do 2 years in the sub academy in Donnybrook, and at the end of those 2 years, when the under 20s have played, and if obviously that's your year to be in the under 20s selection. At the end of that, then or during that season, they make your mind up at who they're going to offer. And after that, the other provinces can then come in and look to pick up the players who have missed out. So Connacht have done very well over the last couple of years of being able to get players that didn't make the Leinster Academy. And this year they've picked up Josh O'Connor, Sam Milo, etc. And that's natural because Leinster can't take everybody into their academy. But the issue is if you've got a seven, it's the only place in the world I know that only make decisions at 20 about academies. And my counter argument to that is effective. If you go into an academy at 20, you're coming out of the academy at 23. It's a short career, it's a short career, and you probably need to have financial support from family to get you to 23. And that's a big ask for a lot of people. It's not simple. And I think, so my argument, and also Leinster have exclusive or a monopoly on every single kid that comes out of school. There's very little poaching from Munster, Connacht or Ulster at 18, right? So Leinster seem to have a free run at those kids. So they can have a huge amount of kids in the system and make a decision at 20, which is great for Leinster because at 20, you should have a lot better idea what that player's probably maximum is at, rather than at 18. It's more of a guess because you have two years worth of development. You have 2 years looking at them in the academy. So anyway, long story short, Pat Lam and Rob Baxter, Pat Lam in particular, heard about Bertie and offered him a month's trial, and he's gone over there and he's done very well, and he signed a 3+1 contract, so 3 years plus another year optional for both parties. And yeah, I think he's a big loss to Leinster purely because he's very different to the normal player in our pathway. So I remember when Gordon Darcy came out of school, he was exceptional. Rob Kearney came out of school, he was exceptional. James Ryan came out of school, he was exceptional. My vintage, my year was O'Gara, Stringer, Frankie Sheen came out of Cork. I played against them all the way through under 13s. You knew that I certainly felt playing against them that they had the potential to play for Ireland. And in my opinion, this kid is that good. Plus, he has a skill set that it's very hard to coach. I mean, he's got vision, he's got offload ability, he's got footwork. He's nearly a Polynesian type prototype in terms of his footwork and his offloading ability. So I would have thought he was someone that they needed to try and keep and put kid gloves around him. It didn't happen. There's a lot of wastage in Leinster. The system is in a tricky place at the moment. I mean, the Leinster development team got beaten 67-7 by Connacht last weekend. I know Connacht had some older players, but they had a lot of guys who were let go by Leinster. At A level over the last year, I've watched a good bit of Leinster stuff. It certainly isn't dominant. And the problem is when you're not beating those teams, in the regularly at A level, they then get belief when they become senior players. So I just think, look at it. Obviously, Leinster's argument is there's only so many spots. My argument is if you see someone who's unbelievably talented, you need to try and make sure that you keep that player in your system. And I do think, and Leinster would say, well, maybe I'm alone in this. I think Pat Lam thinks it, Conor McPhillips thinks it now. So most people who played against him in school, all his peers who are now playing with players, in that position in the Leinster underage, Can't believe it. He hasn't been kind of fast tracked, and that's just life. That's it. You win or lose. But from my point of view, for Lucas Bertie Newman, he now has security of having 3 years where he's getting paid, where he's in a professional environment, where he's training with, you know, Semi Odraga, Charles Piatow, where he has top S&C. He has an under-18s league this year to play in, and he actually played yesterday against Bath. And I had a friend of mine who's an agent at the match, and Bath were 28-0 up, and Lucas turned it on, scored a try for 60 minutes, and got a last-minute drop goal to win 29-28. It's under-18s, but it's Bath's academy who are all contracted. You know, he's in a Bristol academy, so he has something that I think is rare. And look, he mightn't come true, but I do think he's a loss because of his X factor. And those lads are despite all the numbers, those X factor players are rare. And from a Leinster point of view, they've now lost a young kid to Montpellier, Karl Martin, who basically felt, well, there was nothing for him here, so he went to Montpellier on a 3-year Esport contract. They've lost Will Hickey from St. Michael's, who was the outstanding back row of his generation. I know there's a lot of back rows, but he's gone to Ospreys on a senior academy contract. There's a young kid, Grogan, from Coolmine, who I believe is going to Poe. There's a kid, O'Hara, who's going to AFL. And I do think that, you know, players are looking around going, can I afford to spend 2 years in a sub-academy? Sorry, players who have options. Obviously, the players who don't have options or are locked into their studies aren't going to leave. So they are, you know, there's a certain safety in that. But the players who have options are now looking at those options. And the reality is, you know, if you want to be a professional rugby player, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And it's about getting into an environment where you're one of 15 instead of one of 50, you know, and you have the financial payment of having a contract, which is obviously going to give you a better chance. I believe it gives you a better chance because if you're in academy in the Ospreys, you're training with a senior team. If you're in a sub-academy in Leinster, you're training with a sub-academy. And, you know, that access to the top coaches. Let's be honest, top coaches aren't coaching in academies. They're coaching in the pro level. So that automatically gives you a better chance. You're also training with Alan Wynne-Jones if you're in the senior academy in the Ospreys. So that's the challenge now for Leinster to see if the model is still brilliant. And it's still very good, but can it be better? That's the question, I would say. You know, I hate to see a really, really talented schoolboy leave and have a role to play in it, because my advice to Lucas Bertie Newman was, you can't turn down a 3-year contract in Bristol to spend 2 years in a sub-academy, you know? So that's the reality, that's that story. So yeah, I'm biased because I know him very well, I coached him, but I think because I know him very well and coached him, I hopefully know more about him and could see his talent.
I have a feeling we'll probably return to that topic a couple of times this season, and maybe as it applies to Bertie Newman a few times in the next couple of years, all going well for him. We wish him well with his move, naturally enough. To speak of options, actually, Bernard, and I know you need to take a breath there, but I did want to ask you as well about Leinster's front row and a potential reshuffle there. It's something you touched upon on Twitter only a couple of weeks ago. Cian Healy potentially doing a bit of work at tight head. Is that happening? Do we know? What's the story?
Well, look, it definitely happened, and he went quite well there, as you wouldn't be surprised. I mean, a player of his power, experience, craftiness, you know, could adapt. It could give him a new lease of life, in my opinion, and you know, especially with Porter moving back to Loosehead. You know, from a Leinster point of view, it gives you Porter, Kelleher, Furlong. That's a European Cup winning front row, in my opinion. With Healy there, who's obviously not holding anyone back by any manner of means. But if Keane, with Furlong being, you know, obviously in Lions duty, with a couple of injuries, if he could do a job at tight head, I think that'd be a big boost to Leinster, and obviously still being able to play at Loosehead. So I think they just tried him out. It looked good. And it's something that, well, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but certainly it was thought about, and there has been no negative reaction to it from the player or from what he's done at training.
Interesting. You mentioned Dan Sheehan earlier, Murray, and there was a question here actually specifically about Sheehan from Owen Hansen on Twitter. He was wondering, is Sheehan someone who could push through to make the November squad for Ireland? He was extremely impressive versus Harlequins, that's in Leinster's pre-season game, and like Kelleher is another extremely dynamic, powerful hooker around the park. What are your thoughts there?
I think he has so much potential, and excellent athlete. Obviously, he's a different shape to some hooker. He's taller at 6'3", isn't he? But he's a big, heavy guy. He's explosive, really good carrier, clever around the ruck with those little pick and jams and snipes over the top of it, and definitely has a nice skill level to his game as well. The line-out throw, I think his actual technique and his action is really nice to watch, and when he nails them, he's a beautiful thrower. Obviously, they're going to be challenged around being consistent with that around the set piece as well as you adapt to more senior rugby. Around November, maybe it might be a little bit early. The tricky bit now is you don't have those Champions Cup games in October as you previously did, and that's probably a real proving ground to take that step onto test level. That's a challenge for him, I think, is to get into those European minutes and rack them up and get more exposure to the top teams, because he's looked really, really good against the likes of Zebra and Benetton and a few other good teams in the Pro 14 as it was then. I think there's loads of additional potential there, and he seems to have the attitude to go along with it. So I would not be surprised to see him push into the Ireland mix maybe a little bit further down the road. Farrell's been quite consistent with Herring and Kelleher and Heffernan, and he definitely likes that dynamic type of hooker, and Sheehan definitely fits the bill there. So certainly one to watch for the course of this season.
One here from our friend Michael Halpenny, who in another life I think was a rugby journalist, or at least could be now if he didn't have probably a better job, if we're honest. No offense, Mer. But he has been crunching some serious numbers about Rhys Ruddock. So he says, looking at their website, Leinster played 26 matches last season. Ruddock played in 15 of them, starting 14. So of those 15 matches, Leinster won 14, with the exception being the La Rochelle match, when he went off injured at a point when Leinster were leading, and he had played a crucial role in establishing that lead. Of the other 11 matches, Leinster won 7 and lost 4. So that's of the 11 that Ruddock wasn't involved in, one of which was the Munster game where Leinster picked a second string side, admittedly. He says, I haven't done the analysis for other players, so I'm leaving myself open to accusations of cherry picking stats, but he did have a phenomenal season last year, deservedly, in my opinion, earning a recall to the Irish team. And I'm wondering if he might be one of the keys to Leinster's season. I'm not at all sure that he's going to be in any matchday 23s for Ireland, so if he's fit, he should play a lot for Leinster. Josh Murphy is next in line, and I hope that he can build on that, but I don't think that he offers the same brute force and go forward that Ruddock does. Those stats are phenomenal, Birch, and the curious case of Rhys Ruddock continues, really, doesn't it? Because I think most people would kind of agree with Michael in that he might not be a starter or even in matchday 23s for Ireland, and yet it would seem, based on those numbers, that he is absolutely quintessential to Leinster. Yeah,
he is. He's decluded. Look, they're formidable anyway, and a lot of those games they probably would have went out Rhys, but that's not down talking the impact I think he has. I think he's a player's player. I think he's phenomenally consistent. Players, opposition hate playing against him. He's just so physically strong. And there's a difference between being physically strong and powerful. He's just strong. He's kind of Vermeulen type profile in terms of, he's just a kind of a rock of a man. And I do think he's a phenomenal player. I think Leinster missed him against La Rochelle, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Ireland he needs to play for Ireland every week. It's just a really tough one. I think his form, means he should be in the Irish squad all the time. But is his top end able to dominate as much at international level? That still has to be proven, but his form has been outstanding, and he is he's probably one of the key men for Leinster, again this season.
Let's move on to Connacht then, Murray. And there's a good question to kick us off here from Brian Duffy on Twitter. He says, looking forward to another season of the pod, lads. Thank you, Brian. I should have edited that part out, actually. But he was wondering, how do you rate Connacht's chances heading into a fourth season under Andy Friend? Square looks a little short in some areas. Will they cope? And what will be a successful season for the men out west, he asks.
A successful season. They're targeting a home quarter final in the URC, and to be back in that mix would be excellent for them after a couple of years of maybe not making really clear progress. I know behind the scenes they feel that they've moved in a certain direction. They're talking about this style of play that they've teamed as fast, relentless, adaptable. That's how they want people to see them on the pitch, encapsulating a bit of that 2016 mentality around tack, the relentlessness of never falling out of the fight, and then being adaptable to how the opposition are playing, and that for me is probably the key of the three. Is like being a little bit more pragmatic at times. They've worked hard, their kicking game. Obviously, Jack Carty and Conor Fitzgerald have qualities in that area, but there's got to be a nice balance to their game. And the real word that they should be talking about incessantly is consistency, because that's been the massive thing holding them back over the last number of years, you know, not backing up a really strong performance. I think they're capable of upsetting anyone in this league and winning against any side, but your concern is that a week later they're going to dip off and decline. A lot of that is around squad depth, and that was our chat last year. You probably still have similar concerns. They've got the same numbers in 43, but Friend believes the squad is in a better place in terms of the progression of some of the younger guys there. However, you just have to look at Loosehead. They're due to announce a signing. He spoke on Monday. It was Tuesday that Friend said, listen, we're nearly across the line with a Loosehead prop because Buckley is injured into December. Gavin Thornbury's got a shoulder injury for the next couple of months. There are a number of other players like Alex Wooten, Caelan Blade, a host of them really coming into the season with injuries, and already you're looking at it and going, they're a little bit threadbare there, and guys who maybe haven't proven themselves in senior professional rugby on a consistent basis need to step up and do a job there. So they've got to be reliant on guys doing that, and the people who are maybe not number one in the depth chart realizing that their role is just as important, and they are going to be the number one at stages in the season. So I suppose I have my concerns around that, and until they can show that consistency, you're not going to be convinced that they can take a next step and compete for a trophy again, which is what they did in 2016. It seems like an awful long time ago now, and it'd be nice that the province and us didn't have to talk about that as much as the high point, that they kind of set themselves a new one under Andy Friend.
For certain. Is it possible, Bernard, to generate the level of consistency that kind of require when you are a little bit threadbare, as Murray says, taking into account the injuries at the moment, but even generally speaking, that squad of 43, as much as it might have improved on a pound for pound level, or it might be a better quality squad overall than the 43 from last season, they are still, as Murray points out, light in a couple of areas. Is depth the absolute key to consistency? Is there sort of no way around that in terms of performing consistently when you are a little bit light, say?
Yeah, well, look, they need a lot of luck in terms of injuries, and it's actually going to be more difficult for them this season because there's less clashes with international rugby, and obviously now we should have 4 stronger teams coming into the league, and 4 teams that would bring a lot of physicality, which is, you know, it drains you, and it obviously can increase the injury. So I think what Connacht needs to get a home quarter final is a massive, massive year from their coaches. And, you know, I'm really excited to see, you know, what Peter Wilkins does as effectively, you know, him and Dewald Senegal are now kind of senior coaches, with Dewald looking after forwards and Peter Wilkins looking after the attack, and with Andy Friend, you know, kind of helicopter view, tying it all together, and then 2 young Irish coaches, Colin Tucker looking after defence and Mossy looking after the skills and backs. But I think Peter Wilkins will have Peter Wilkins was an analyst in Queensland Reds when I spent some time with him back in 2000 and maybe 2009, 2010 when they won Super Rugby with Quaid and Will Genia, and he was a brilliant analyst who was doing some coaching on the side as part of his development, and obviously came to Edinburgh as a defence coach, and then Connacht as defence coach. And I think he would have a real deep understanding of how you attack affects defence. Okay, and you know, a lot of the Connacht fans and maybe pundits, you know, saw Connacht shipping some heavy defeats at times and questioned their defence. And I had a really good look back at their defence, and it's in terms of system, there wasn't a huge amount wrong with it, but sometimes they hamper their own defence with their lack of a really excellent kicking game, and just, you know, kicking game isn't just the kicks that you know Fitzgerald and Carty do that make highlights views, which are they're brilliant kicks, but they're only 15%, or they're only in one area of the field. I felt that their exits were letting them down. They were getting pressure back on top of them again, and having to defend multiple defensive sets, and that basically was what broke them most of the time. And obviously they had a massive problem with their line-out maul D. And again, if you can't stop line-out mauls, well, one, if they kick the corner, it's a try, but 2, further up the field, teams can milk penalties that they can kick for goal or go into the corner again. So that's a huge thing. And Dewald Senegal, you know, I think that's going to be his big challenge over the next 2 or 3 months, is to is to shore that up, make sure referees don't feel Connacht can stop line-out mauls without giving away penalties, and stop the opposition from going after that as a weakness quite early doors. So, it's a very good coaching team. I think Andy Friend, his 4th year, he knows this group, he knows this league, and I think that their ability to gel and come up with a really strong game plan week to week. Murray's spoken about their game philosophy, which makes sense to me. That's going to be the key to achieving that quarter-final. They're probably going to have to coach better than anyone else in the league to get to quarter-final, in my opinion, based upon squad depth and probably budget.
It's a really interesting chat with Andy Friend every single time, and he spoke at that, what you call the helicopter approach. He had it down as the gardener approach, where he's allowing his coaches to really do their thing, and that's the sense from him in general, even with the playing squad. Like, you think as you go further into it, you get closer and closer and you try and micromanage everything. He's actually going the opposite way, even with the captaincy thing. So Jared Butler is no longer the captain, he's the club captain now. That means that he's obviously the main leader off the pitch, but he's not necessarily going to be the captain every single time they play, and that's Andy Friend trying to push through other guys. He talks about the team meetings they have, and there's a video analysis point and they're looking for an answer, and he says all eyes tend to go to Jared Butler, but he obviously doesn't want that situation. He wants everyone having their own solutions and their own input. So the likes of Paul Boyle, the likes of Jack Carty, Tom Daly and Caelan Blade, those guys being more, vocal is the wrong word, but being more authoritative leaders as well. So he's kind of a little bit further removed from it, but that allows people to take ownership for it and drive it on. He feels that's what Connacht need at the moment. So you would hope that they embrace that and harness that, and it brings out the absolute best on a coaching and playing front.
And Birch is dead right, especially with the start of the season, Murray, about the importance of coaches, because when you do have the injury absentees that Connacht have, you need to avoid a situation into which they fell through no fault of their own, really, probably in Friend's 2nd year, if I'm not mistaken, when, if you remember, the start of the season was just absolutely blighted, cursed with injuries, to the point that actually there was such a deficit to chase, I think probably across 2 competitions, if memory serves. Their season almost became a write-off competitively from very early, and like, of course they sort of grew into it then and they produced plenty of good performances, but it was sort of like there was nothing to lose. It became nearly a developmental season. You want to avoid that this time around, because when you look at that injury list, it is significant. So you've got to stay in it to begin with in order for it to actually be a meaningful season, I think. That's
also the strength of the league now, a top 8. You know, there's going to be battles for that 7, 8, 9, 10 position that are going to be every bit as intriguing as the top 4, and that definitely plays into Connacht's hands. Last season, as soon as they announced the restructured format, you know, they're finished really. As you say, there was nothing competitively or in terms of a trophy to play for there, given the fact that Leinster and Munster were odds-on favourites to go into the final. So the format definitely suits them, and I think that's something we should also mention. It's exciting that people are going to be battling for those places in Europe. Obviously, everyone in their own individual regional pool will be battling to be number 1 there and get that automatic spot, but the top 8 is going to be a really interesting part of it, and hopefully there'll be more engagement with what the other clubs are doing. We're very insular and have been, like, just talking about the Irish provinces, that's our bread and butter obviously, but other clubs and their fortunes are going to have a big effect on those things this season.
Yeah, just confirmation coming through there from the big man Bernard Jackman that Andrew Porter will start at 1 for Leinster this weekend. Cian Healy named at 19. Very interesting.
Speculation. Don't, as Leo would say.
Okay, yeah. Let's chat about Munster then. The 4th province in terms of the order of this conversation. Please don't take any offence to that. We've been on for an hour. I think I'm getting tired. But I guess when we're speaking about Connacht there, and you want to avoid having to have some of the same conversations as you had last season, that applies to Munster very much this time around as well, Murray. Excuse me. And I think one of the interesting parts of say fans' interpretation of Munster this season is when we even put out the call for questions on Twitter or in the members WhatsApp group, there weren't actually too many questions about Munster, because I think everybody knows what they should expect or what they should be capable of, and the overall or overarching question is whether or not they can actually do that, whether or not they can actually win a trophy, which is all they want to do. And to be honest, I have no idea what the answer is. Do you?
I don't at this stage, but I actually think like a little bit, not the opposite of what I was talking about with Leinster, but I think there does need to be a more noticeable shift in how they go about things. And by all accounts, that's kind of happening. Word is that Stephen Larkham has an even greater influence now. He's almost the head coach now, and Johan's almost a kind of director of rugby overseeing things. That Larkham's footprint will be more over the team, and we may see slight tweaks in how they approach some of those bigger games, because that is the difference. They're an unbelievably strong team. They're so excellent for the course of the whole season, as Johan van Graan is always at pains to point out, over 80% win record, and they put teams away really intelligently at times. Sometimes they do play a more expansive brand, that's probably the wrong word, but more daring approach in attack, and then it just shuts up shop for those knockout games. And it's proven now you can't just keep doing that over and over again. It's the definition of insanity, because it hasn't been working. And the most recent one to Leinster in that Pro 14 final was probably the most dispiriting of the bunch. They just didn't fire a shot. So I think there's an onus there to really progress that, and we won't find out until later in the season. I've absolutely no doubt that they'll blast through most teams, and they'll be in a really good position come knockout time, and then we find out all about them. So that's on the coaching staff, but also the players, and it's something we've touched on before. There's guys who are another year senior now and still haven't taken that step that you've spoken about there. The onus is on them to look at themselves and do something slightly different as well, and be better prepared to dominate in some of those big games. It's a long way away, but there's more than enough quality there, as well as some of that young talent Birch mentioned that you would hope now have an influence decisively on the squad and aren't just filtered in and out for the kind of lower profile games. There's enough ability there in guys like Ahern and Crowley and a whole host of them to have an impact on the senior team. So it would be brilliant to see that this season.
How do you think they're fixed, Birch?
Look, I think they should be winning 80% of their games, because they're Munster, and they have the history, the budget, the players' talent, everything in their favour. And okay, they didn't have the 16 man last year because no crowds, but they should be the top table in my opinion. So, but are they ready to take the next step? I can't say it now because I haven't seen them play. I'm down there for Saturday night. I'm looking forward to seeing them live. They've been very, very consistent, semi-finals, regularly. It's just that last step, and it's a big year. I know there's rumours that Johan and all the coaches are going to re-sign now, but I still think it's a big year for this group. They'll be thereabouts. But I couldn't say they're going to win a trophy because I haven't seen anything, and I would worry about their front row cover. I think again, we mentioned last year, I think Jenkins, unless he absolutely pulls up trees, it was a foreign player spot. It should have been used elsewhere. When you see what Alex Kindellan could do, when you see what John Hodnett can do, I think CJ's replacement should have come from one of those young players, and used that foreign player spot for a hooker or a tight head prop. But they have what they have now, and Jenkins has got to prove his worth to Johan, and who's put faith in him and turn out to be a real game winner.
The front row does seem to be an area that we probably will come back to, Murray, or at least if they do fall short in a similar way to the way in which they have over the last couple of seasons, more than a couple really, it'll be a conversation again. Why Jenkins? Why not bolster your front row, probably at hooker, in terms of just dynamism, ball carrying ability and so on. That being said, do you feel that, say, the hopeful eventual introduction of RG Snyman can counterbalance, say, the lack of explosivity in the front row? Like, does somebody like that actually change things markedly to the point that maybe we don't have to have that conversation in a few months' time?
He's an absolute game changer. He was when he signed, and I know he's only played 7 minutes, but he will be. And there'll have to be patience there. Obviously, it'll take time for him to get back after such a long stint and such a tough time. Just getting back from this, it's been really difficult for him. Obviously, the fire pit incident as well, and over and back to South Africa. So he will take time to get back there, but you would hope come the second part of the season, when they need that impact, he'll absolutely provide it. What a gain line merchant, offloading ability. He's an X-factor player in the second row. Jenkins, obviously, we spoke about that a lot last season, but he's a big, robust guy, and he adds a bit of that tight carrying that they've possibly been missing as well. So you've got the prospect of even Klein, Jenkins, Snyman, Tyke Byrne, as well as Coombs and Peter O'Mahony and Jack O'Donoghue. You've got a really powerful unit for the back 5-year scrum. Definitely the front row has been an issue. Archer and Ryan are incredible servants for the province. Definitely a little bit underrated, but the way this game is going, you want really explosive carries across that area of the pitch, and Munster will hope that Josh Wycherley and Roman Salano, if he can get a bloody injury-free run, and Keenan Knox can provide a little bit more of that. But they're obviously early in their development. They haven't played, obviously Wycherley has, but Knox and Salano haven't played in European rugby even at this stage. So to expect them to make that kind of impact straight away is just it's not going to happen. But there's loads of quality up front, and to come back around to Snyman, absolutely. Like, he's one of the best locks in the world in the game when he's fully fit and firing, and they'll just be really excited about getting him into the team and back up and running for a semi-final when they're back there again, because he's a real difference maker.
Another difference, Bernard, it's almost an obvious one, and yet it maybe creeps under the radar a little bit in the Munster discourse, is that they hopefully will have a full season with Joey Carberry at QB. And it's an important season for him personally as well. And I don't mean to obviously lump pressure on a guy who is still, relatively speaking, only recently back from a debilitating injury. Also, he doesn't listen to the podcast, so who cares? But like, he's 26 in about 5 or 6 weeks' time. That is absolutely not old, but he did lose a couple of, say, formative developmental years in which he could have actually brought on his game through minutes alone, and just through that big game experience that you would have garnered over that period of time. So I don't want to describe it as a make or break year for him, but it is going to be pivotal, because he's going to need to play consistently well and be the talisman that Munster signed him to be this season, or else there will invariably be questions towards the end of it, at the end of the season, particularly when you look at the options they have coming up, we think, at 10.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he should be ready to handle that pressure now. He's a top end player. I think it was great he got game time at the end of last season. Now he's had a full preseason, and he should be very, very comfortable in that Stephen Larkham attacking framework. He has a skill set to play any type of game. So yeah, at 26 years of age, he's had enough games, and he's shown enough big game composure in the past to not have any real worries about his mental strength. So no, I would expect him to be a key man. And if Munster are going to win, a trophy, whether it's Europe or the URC, it's hard to see with JJ gone now and a talented crop of young 10s behind him. But you would imagine that Joey would have to stay fit and be in top form.
Right. Let's wrap, boys, with a few predictions. We'll get some early season, incredibly premature tournament predictions from you. United Rugby Championship champions from you, Bernard Jackman. Leinster. Murray?
Yeah, same. Sorry, just last thing on Munster. Also, Simon Zebo is back in the province. Worth mentioning, because it is going to be exciting. It's going to be really interesting. It's going to be really interesting how he gets on, and has been training the house down by all accounts, and really motivated and taking on a bit more of the mentorship side of things and working with younger players. So he's obviously keen to get back in the Ireland mix, and we saw in relatively recent times how on the big occasions with Racing as well, he's a man for those and thrives on those as well. And that's what we're talking about with Munster, with Snyman. Hopefully Zebo can get back to former heights from their point of view and add to that really incredible try-scoring record he has. But yeah, I do think Leinster are going to win the URC.
Okay, fair enough. What about, I know we haven't spoken about Champions Cup, but I know you guys also have an eye on the bigger European picture. Any standout European sides that maybe we wouldn't have considered contenders last season? Who do you think is going to win that?
Toulouse have started the season really strongly again. They're still a runaway train. So obviously they're the ones to beat. But early doors, they look really good. The interesting thing is the first weekend in England, you saw Bristol and Exeter both losing, and Saracens, they're obviously not in the Champions Cup, but they looked really strong. So it's early days yet. We've got until, December to come up with our answers for that. So I'm going to sit on the fence for now.
Based on last weekend, I would say the contenders are all absolutely delighted Saracens aren't in it, because they were just back to the Saracens of old. I know it's only one game, but how they how they went to Ashton Gate and just completely snuffled out anything Bristol wanted to do was very impressive.
Very finally then, a couple of quick fire predictions for this weekend. Let's start with the Ireland women against Scotland. They should win. Murray, will they win?
Yeah, I think they'll win, and I think they will win well. Obviously permutations in the other ones matter, but I think they'll produce their best performance.
Birch?
Yeah, agree.
Super. Connacht away to Cardiff. Murray, Kinsella.
Oh, haven't seen too much of Cardiff's build up, but that's a tough away fixture. I'll go Cardiff in a narrow one.
Birch? Yeah, I'll go Cardiff. I think Connacht have shipped 2 big defeats and just still trying to find that balance. So Cardiff for me.
Sticking with yourself, Birch. Ulster at home to the Glasgow Warriors.
Yeah, Ulster for sure. Ulster with a bonus.
Murray?
Yeah, Ulster with a bonus, Leinster with a bonus. Ooh, actually, Leinster with a bonus. And I do think Munster will score a bonus as well. Sorry to answer your questions in advance.
Yeah,
no, that's perfect.
I'll double down on those.
Before we end that, Gav, I want to say congrats on your excellent interview with Mr. Rock Nation as well. It's made waves, and deservedly so. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah, although I teed him up for a skewering on second captains, the poor fella. Jeez, the lads got very excited. Come here, boys. Thanks a million. What else do I have to say? Well, we can see both of you on Ortiz screens this weekend, if I'm not mistaken, for which game? Down at Thomond, is it?
Yeah. Looking forward to it.
Class. Looking forward to that myself. And thank you to everybody at home for all of your questions in the Members Rugby WhatsApp group. It's members.42.ie. If you want to sign up there, you obviously gain entry to the group if you want it, but there are so many offerings on the homepage, the Langley page, as you'll see it when you go in there. Loads of podcasts, different things. Check it out. It's a €5 a month or €42 for the year, and you're also supporting our independent sports journalism. Thanks for listening. Enjoy all of the rugby over the weekend. It's going to be a good one. We'll catch you next week. Until then, mind yourselves. Take it easy.